In a dramatic move that's shocked the world, President Donald Trump has imposed sweeping tariffs to worldwide trade, causing massive fears of economic slowdowns and markets to actually crash. In today's video, we're going to be talking about how this may affect the Costa del Sol property market and buyers like yourself. Matt, where do we start? I mean, there's a lot to cover. What a day. Yesterday, Friday,
No bueno.
No bueno.
No bueno. Yeah, I didn't even have time to shave, because
That's the excuse.
I meant to shave for the next video, and then here we are, because we need to talk about this. It's very obviously everybody in the world is affected to one degree or another. The market doesn't like uncertainty. Well, money's a scaredy cat, is it?
Money's a scaredy cat, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, and people don't know what the next step is going to be.
Totally. I think, Matt, as well, is in these situations, these are really early days. Right, so it's the really early days of the tariffs being imposed, the early days of countries reacting, the early days of the market. Is it going to improve? Is it going to continue sort of downfall? Who knows? And that uncertainty, like we always say, money is a scaredy cat.
Yeah.
So,
are the countries that the tariffs have been imposed on going to come back to the negotiating table? Is it a negotiating tactic for Trump? Mm-hmm. Nobody knows. All we can really speak to is what we think, how we think that's going to impact the market here, and also some key reminders for people that were, that are in these different countries throughout Europe, here in Spain even, or in the United States and Canada, that are affected by this, that were and are considering buying property in Spain. I think we have some very interesting points that we're going to raise today.
Yeah. So one of the first things I would like to sort of open up with is there's been so much thrown at the coast in the last years. It's for me the reaction is, oh, another one now. You know what I mean? It's pre-COVID, with COVID, everything that's happened to this market, it seems like it's always made it stronger. It's going to be very interesting.
Super resilient market.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out in this case, because it's a very different sort of, we're talking about a trade war essentially between countries. It's going to be interesting to see how it affects it. But if you look at COVID, when COVID hit Costa del Sol, we thought it was the end of an era, right? Okay, this is really going to affect the market, and it just made it stronger and stronger. So, COVID, the outcome of COVID was more people wanted outdoor space, more people wanted the quality of life, more people wanted to relocate and enjoy the Spanish lifestyle, which resulted in an increase of people relocating to Spain and living in Spain. Talking about the US buyers, because we're going to cover, let's say, the general market, but just talking to the US buyers at the moment. Let's talk about positives. We can also talk about negatives, but I think let's talk about the positives at the moment.
I think there's enough negatives. I like the idea of focus on the positives.
Yeah, I totally agree. So let's just focus on the positive. I think that for US buyers at the moment, the US has never been stronger against the euro. It's going to be interesting.
The US dollar. Yeah.
It's going to be interesting to see how that pans out in the next few days. Obviously, with these tariffs and the markets up and down, this could change. The currency values could fluctuate. Yeah, so the US has been at an all-time 20-year sort of high, which makes European property a lot cheaper for US buyers, which is a massive positive.
From my understanding, you're more or less getting property here at a 7 to 10% discount of what you would back home, just from a pure currency exchange standpoint. Yeah. Cool. So more bang for your buck.
More bang for your buck. Okay.
And by the way, if you've pulled out of the financial markets, presumably you're going to be sitting on a bunch of cash that you don't know what to do with. So one option could definitely be to put it in the market here at a discount.
That's the other thing with financial markets is one of the reasons why, in my opinion, Spain and the coast, not central Spain, but the coast of Spain are still going to be an interesting sort of destination for the investor segment of buyers here. Is that look what happens to stock markets. You don't see sharp falls in property prices as you do in stock prices. Look at Nvidia and all these yesterday on screen -6, -7, -8%, huge losses one day to the other. But if you look at, let's say, property markets, it's a lot more stable, and investing in brick and mortar is totally different to investing in stocks and bonds. So I do think that's another big advantage for people which have a big chunk of their, let's say, investment portfolio in stocks that go, okay, now with this economic uncertainty, it might be worth exiting that investment and put it into brick and mortar, given the stability of it.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think again back to the Costa del Sol having been a resilient market over the years, kind of in many different ways. and certainly the property market specifically has shown a lot of resilience, and more than just resilience, it has grown through all of these turbulent times. So, so yeah, no, I would tend to agree. And as I said, if people have just pulled out of the financial markets and they're trying to figure out like what do I do with my money, could be a good place to put your money.
So we did this exercise yesterday where we went through, the kind of buyers we have at High Homes for the coast, right? So talking about Costa del Sol, we have buyers which are looking to relocate. We have buyers that look to, live here part-time. And we have buyers that look to buy a holiday home or an investment property.
Yeah, we were trying to figure out what the potential impact of all this could be on the business. And that's when we started to dive into the numbers.
So my question and sort of like a reflection to talk about is, okay, if you're going to be, let's say, buying a property on the Costa del Sol to relocate and you're in your, in your 40s or in your 50s or whatever age you're in, is a economic slowdown going to stop you? I don't think it will stop many relocators. I don't see that being like a
if you were going to move, you were going to move anyway.
Yeah,
you're probably still going to move.
Yeah. Then for the segment of part-time livers, let's say what I mean by part-time livers, for those people that don't know, there's a massive amount of people from Norway, Sweden, Denmark that spend the winter months here. That's a massive part of the Costa del Sol's market.
Sun chasers.
Well, they call winter sun, no? So they look for the winter sun here. Yeah. They spend the months of, let's say, up until June or May in Spain, and then they leave in summer because in their country summers are better, and then spend the winter months here. So are those guys going to be affected by this? Not sure. Now, holidaymakers. I think that's the segment, and this is my view on it. That's the segment which will most be impacted, because a holiday home is a, let's say,
it's a nice to have, not a need to have.
It's a nice to have. So I think what we might see is a slowdown in holiday home buyers going, okay, let's just see what happens. Let's just see what goes on, right? I do see that potentially happening. And then the last segment are the investors. And the investors can go either way. Like, I do think that, if you land in Estepona right now and you have 400 grand and jump into a holiday rental or let's say Airbnb rental, to put it in easy terms, like the returns are fantastic. They are really fantastic, no? So like, and you are literally able to buy a property and rent it out from the get-go. So are these guys going to be affected? Who knows? Is it going to affect the way in which these guys buy, or these buyers buy? Very early time, very early to say. But in my opinion, if you compare a stock, which is just a purchase of a stock or a bond, looking at a screen that directly depends on, let's say, global markets going up and down with this trade war, which is just the beginning of it. Like knowing Donald Trump, in my experience, it's not going to be something that's going to finish in a week. We're in this for the long term, or midterm, let's say. So I don't see, the trade war being off TV outlets for the next 3-4 months.
Yeah. I would caution, though, anybody that just in the example that you gave of people that are buying holiday homes, that while you may want to wait to see how the markets recover, waiting is not going to do you any favors when it comes to property prices here. In fact, if you were on the sidelines last year and you waited until now to buy a property, you're probably going to be buying at about a 10%. Like it's probably going to cost you 10% more than it would have if you had bought the year before. And I'm just kind of pulling a general number out of the thin air, and 10% more from the year prior to that. So in other words, if you had bought 2 years ago, you would have got a 20% discount on the property. I suspect the market is going to continue the market here on the Costa del Sol is going to continue to increase. The demand will remain constant. And I think if you wait another year, you're going to be paying, again, give or take, you're going to be paying another 10% more, and so on and so forth. So just a kind of a word of caution to anybody who's waiting on the sidelines, who is considering this, and that you will, like, time in that sense when it comes to real estate, although typically time in real estate is your friend, in that case, it's not.
So something else which is interesting to sort of talk about is, we don't know what the sort of inflation consequence is going to be to the markets. And I've always said on this channel and, publicly said that, property is always a hedge against inflation. So, if this ends up, creating an excess or, inflation rates that were not expected and, money or currency value keeps on plummeting, I think property keeps on being a hedge against that, right? If you pair that with, in our case, in our markets, not Europe's, but Spanish interest rates for banks, they're still quite low. I mean, this entire sort of turmoil has brought the Euribor yesterday down to 2.2%, right? So 2.2% to borrow on 30-year terms is still really economically interesting. So another, let's say, angle for buyers that might have been a cash buyers that were looking to buy an investment property, maybe it's a good moment to leverage with a mortgage. You know, there's always good with bad. Like, you know, Euribor interest rates at 2.2% is incredible. Like, you know, you can buy money at that price. That's also in a way thanks to Trump. And it's not a great thing, but it's also an interesting sort of incentive for mortgage buyers.
Well, aren't Americans paying sort of in the 6.5% range?
It's ridiculous there.
Yeah.
So no, interest rates in the US and all parts of the world are ridiculous. You know, I think in the Euribor in Spain and interest rates in Spain are very attractive.
Yeah, I mean, this is why we've seen over the last couple of years a huge influx of North American buyers. I mean, the US dollar, cheaper to borrow money. Not just that. Again, we talked about the resilience of the market. It's also a lot of people moving here for the lifestyle, and that doesn't change. I mean, it's early April, and it's absolutely beautiful outside, 22 degrees Celsius. We'll have to do a conversion into Fahrenheit. Sorry. It's just like people, you're buying into a lot more than just property here.
Totally right. Like, you know, you can, let's say, have a trade war going on and impose tariffs on whatever countries you want. But the reality is Costa del Sol, you know, will still have 320 sunshine days a year, right?
I'm still going to go to the beach and have paella this weekend.
Yeah, exactly. So, like, you know, I think also that there's an element of stability in this market. Like 15 years ago, I would say that stability wasn't there. I think it was a strong market, but today, Costa del Sol is a rock solid market, And, you know, even though there is, let's say, this, you know, trade war going on, I don't think that it's still gonna be a solid destination. You know, for any of the categories you talked about, for the relocators, for the investors, for the holiday home buyers and so on. There is another angle to this, which I think people tend to forget is, you know, Spain still offers tremendous value. So in light of everything we talked about, right? So obviously the solid destination, the interest rates and this and the other, we can't forget that, you know, property prices in Spain are super attractive. What does that mean? Like if you compare our markets to other markets in Europe, right? Holland, Belgium, Germany, Italy, France for that matter, like you still get a tremendous amount of value. You jump into this market with 400,000 euros, 350,000 euros, you can get so much money, so much value for money. And that's not the same everywhere in Europe. The sort of end goal of your purchase is there is value in this real estate market. And that's not true to everywhere. So like if you look at other, let's say other hotspot destinations, right? Like we talked about recently on the channel, like Costa del Sol is a European hotspot. Like that is the basis. We are a European hotspot, end of conversation, right? If you compare ourselves to other European hotspots, right, and compare apple to apple, we still offer a tremendous more amount of value than these countries.
You know what would be interesting to do? It would be interesting to overlay actually what, you know, 400,000 euros would get you here.
Yeah.
And then what that would get you, we'll go on to Zillow and we'll find a property at an equivalent value in New York for $400,000, and then the same thing in London for £400,000, and just kind of compare them side by side, just to give you guys the visual impact of what you can get here versus on your home markets. I think that'll be quite an interesting,
that's really interesting,
very powerful.
Luna, that's a great video to do. Actually, we can do it like compare, you know, UK. We can compare Holland, Belgium, US, Canada. Canada would be super interesting. As a wrap up, Matt, I would say that, you know, the big headline is just uncertainty, right? But in terms of like interest and what we're seeing in the sort of back office, we're not seeing any difference on inquiries, at least, right?
No, we're still getting the same number of inquiries as we always have. And in fact, I would say the first quarter of this year and now, even since last week, the flow of inquiries into the business hasn't slowed down whatsoever.
And on top of that, like every single, you know, high homes realtor, real estate agent, rockstar is out with clients this week. I think we're set up for one of the busiest Aprils on record. Yeah. We've had a record Q1. I think the conclusion is it's very early days, but at this moment, nothing seems to be affected, at least in our business. But of course, we will keep you guys posted with, you know, updates as and when they come. Right, guys. Well, until the next time. Hasta luego.
Hasta luego.